The FDA? This is an internal company matter. Richard's face had gone completely white. I maintained my composure as the FDA agents took their seats at the conference table, watching Elizabeth Harris's practice CEO smile fracture around the edges. All the sleepless nights of the past week crystallized into this perfect moment of reckoning. Actually, one of the agents replied calmly, deliberate tampering with systems that manage pharmaceutical trial data falls squarely within our jurisdiction. Ms. Lynn contacted our office with evidence suggesting serious compliance violations. I caught Samantha's eye across the room. Her slight nod told me everything I needed to know. She was ready. We had both been manipulated, but today the truth would finally come to light. 1 week earlier, we can pay her half your salary, Richard laughed, leaning back in his chair. It's just business, Diana, nothing personal. I stared at him across his desk, the birthday card my colleagues had signed for me just hours earlier still tucked in my purse. My fingers tightened around the leather strap as I fought to keep my expression neutral. Inside, a storm was brewing. Confusion, betrayal, and something dangerously close to rage. Look, Samantha's been here 6 months now. You've trained her well. The pharmaceutical database system is running smoothly, and frankly, we don't need two people doing one job. The moment seemed surreal. Just 90 minutes ago, I'd been in the office break room, surrounded by colleagues singing Happy Birthday, a small store-bought cake with 41 candles blazing. Now here I was, being told I was redundant. My mind flashed to my apartment's second bedroom, converted into a makeshift office where I'd spend countless evenings refining the very system he was now dismissing so casually. The mortgage payment due next week. The college fund for Jenny I'd been carefully building over the years. The thought of telling my 17-year-old daughter that our plans might need to change. Samantha knows the basics, I said slowly, fighting to keep my voice steady, but she doesn't understand the integration points, the system architecture. Richard waved his hand dismissively. All documented in your process manuals, right? That's what I pay you for. Besides, young talent brings fresh perspectives. The industry is evolving. The industry is evolving. The words hung in the air between us, their meaning clear. At 41, I was considered obsolete. Childhood memory. My father had been an engineer at Boeing for 32 years before they restructured his department. I was 16 when he came home early that Tuesday, his security badge still hanging from his belt, his eyes vacant. They said younger engineers work for less. He told my mother that night, when they thought I couldn't hear. They said my methods were outdated. He never found another engineering position. Within a year, he was working at a hardware store, explaining to customers how to install ceiling fans and repair leaky faucets, his expertise in aviation stress testing wasted. I had promised myself then that I would never be caught off guard like that I would always stay ahead of the curve, continuously learning, making myself indispensable, that I would build a secure future for Jenny, ensuring she would never experience the financial instability that followed my father's layoff. Yet here I was, being shown the door on my birthday, just like my father had been all those years ago. The architecture. My name is Diana Lynn, 41 years old, and until 5 minutes ago, I was the Senior Database Integration Specialist at Pharmatech Solutions for 3 years. I designed and maintained the complex system that tracked drug trials across multiple platforms, connecting research data with regulatory submission requirements for pharmaceutical companies across the country. When Richard hired Samantha 6 months ago, I'd welcomed the help. The system had grown increasingly complex, and having someone manage the day-to-day operations would free me up to implement improvements I'd been planning for months. I'd spent countless hours training her, carefully walking her through the standard procedures, though there hadn't been time to cover the underlying architecture, the invisible connective tissue that made everything work seamlessly. What Samantha couldn't yet see, what Richard certainly couldn't comprehend, was that the architecture wasn't just code and databases. It was a living ecosystem, designed with multiple redundancies and verification protocols that seemed excessive until the moment they weren't. Until the moment they prevented a catastrophic data error that could compromise patient safety during clinical trials. I signed the agreement mechanically, then stood up. Samantha will need the emergency protocols for when systems don't synchronize properly. They're not in the documentation. I'm sure she'll figure it out, Richard replied, already checking his phone. She's quite resourceful. Richard's background. As I walked back to my desk, I recalled the day Richard had been introduced as our new department head a year ago. The previous director, Dr. Michaels, had been a scientist at heart, methodical, respectful of data integrity, understanding the critical nature of our work. Richard had been different from the start. His introduction email had been full of business jargon, optimizing workflows, streamlining operations, maximizing return on investment. There had been whispers in the hallways. He'd made his reputation as a turnaround specialist at 3 previous companies, a hatchet man who could quickly cut costs and boost short-term profits before moving on to his next challenge. His LinkedIn profile boasted of his MBA from a prestigious Chicago business school, but listed no technical qualifications. In our first meeting, he proudly told me how his father, a senior VP at a Fortune 500 company, had taught him that business is about numbers, not people. At the time, I thought it was just corporate talk. Now I understood it was his actual philosophy. When he hired Samantha, fresh out of graduate school with a computer science degree but no real-world experience, I didn't object. Training a junior colleague seemed reasonable, and I enjoyed sharing my knowledge. Samantha was eager and quick to learn the operational procedures, though she sometimes grew impatient with details. Do we really need to run all these verification queries? She'd ask. It adds an hour to the process. That hour prevents weeks of potential disaster recovery, I'd explain. The system is more fragile than it appears. The departure, as I packed my desk, Samantha approached, her expression a mixture of sympathy and awkwardness. I'm really sorry, she whispered. I had no idea this was happening. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She looked impossibly young, reminding me of myself 15 years ago. Eager, confident, unaware of the corporate politics swirling around her. I wondered briefly if she realized she was being set up to fail. As I handed her my system notebook, a notification popped up on my computer screen. Database sync error on client trial DRX1 to 1429 manual resolution required. I started to explain the error, but Richard appeared, ushering me toward the exit. Samantha's got this, he said firmly. It's time for you to go. I smiled tightly. Good luck, I said, meaning it more sincerely than either of them could possibly understand. Walking through the parking lot to my car, I felt oddly light, as if I'd shed something heavy. The spring breeze carried the scent of blooming cherry trees from the corporate landscaping. A birthday present from the universe, perhaps, reminding me that regardless of corporate decisions, life continues its cycles of renewal. I didn't know then that my phone would start ringing within 24 hours. That Pharmatech's carefully balanced system was already beginning its cascading failure. That within a week, I would be sitting across from Richard, Elizabeth, and FDA agents, watching as their carefully constructed plans imploded spectacularly. I only knew that for the moment, I needed to drive home, check on Jenny's college applications, and begin updating my resume. Mother and daughter, that evening, I sat with Jenny at our kitchen table, takeout containers between us. I had planned to cook a nice birthday dinner, but after the day's events, neither of us had the energy. So they just fired you? On your birthday? Jenny's dark eyes, so much like my own, flashed with indignation. At 17, her sense of justice was absolute, uncomplicated by the compromises adulthood forces upon us. They eliminated my position, I corrected gently, using air quotes. It's nothing personal, just business. That's complete garbage, Jenny said, stabbing at her pad thai. After everything you did for them? You literally built their whole system. I smiled at her loyalty. The corporate world doesn't always reward past contributions, honey. They're focused on future costs. So what happens now? She asked, the teenage bravado momentarily slipping to reveal the worry beneath. Are we going to be okay? What I didn't tell her was how the severance package would impact our finances. How the college visits we'd planned to our top choice schools might need to be scaled back. How the carefully mapped future I'd been building for us had suddenly shifted beneath my feet. Instead, I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. It'll be okay. I've got options. This field is specialized enough that experienced architects are always in demand. Jenny looked unconvinced. Mom, you always do this. You always pretend everything's fine, even when it's not. Her perception struck me. It was true. I had developed this habit during the divorce, when Jenny was just 10, shielding her from my fears and uncertainties. Always projecting confidence, even when I felt anything but confident. You're right, I admitted. I'm scared and angry, but I also know my worth. They'll realize what they've lost, probably sooner than they think. I had no idea then just how prophetic those words would prove to be. The system fails. The next morning, I woke to a string of LinkedIn notifications. News of my departure had apparently spread quickly through professional circles. 3 former colleagues had sent messages expressing shock and asking if I was looking for new opportunities. I spent the day updating my resume and researching positions, trying to focus on the future rather than dwelling on the humiliation of being escorted from the building on my birthday. By evening, I'd lined up 2 promising interviews for later in the week. The pharmaceutical data integration field was specialized enough that experienced architects were always in demand. I had just finished preparing dinner when my phone rang. It was Jason, a developer from my former team at Pharmatech. Diana, I know you probably don't want to talk about work, but I'm stuck on something, he said, his voice tight with stress. The Derek's 1429 trial database is showing inconsistencies after the routine Sunday update. I've tried everything in your documentation, but nothing's working. I remembered the error notification I'd seen just before leaving. Did you run the verification sequence on the secondary tables? I asked. Yes, but the systems aren't reconciling. Samantha said to just force an override, but that doesn't seem right. I winced. Definitely don't do that. It could corrupt the entire trial data set. That's what I thought, Jason sighed. I told Richard we should call you, but he said we needed to handle it internally. After providing some guidance, careful not to violate the confidentiality agreement I'd signed, I hung up feeling a curious mix of vindication and concern. The system I'd built was intricate, with carefully designed fail-safes and interconnection points that weren't immediately obvious without understanding the underlying architecture. 2 more calls came in that evening from different team members, each describing escalating problems. Apparently, Samantha had indeed attempted to force an override, which had triggered cascading errors across multiple client databases. The team was now in emergency mode, trying to prevent data corruption from spreading. I declined to answer the 4th call, which came from Richard's number just before midnight. New opportunities. The next morning, a Tuesday, I had an early interview with Metasearch Data, one of Pharmatech's competitors. The hiring manager, impressed with my portfolio, asked why I'd left my previous position. Restructuring, I said simply. They decided to streamline the database management team. He looked skeptical. Interesting timing. We just heard Pharmatech is having major system issues. Something about corrupted trial data. I kept my expression neutral. I wouldn't know. I'm no longer with the company. By Wednesday, I had received official offers from both Metasearch Data and another competitor, each with significantly higher salaries than what I'd made at Pharmatech. A third company requested an interview, mentioning they'd heard excellent things about my architecture skills. Meanwhile, my phone continued to accumulate missed calls from Richard and other Pharmatech numbers. I didn't return them. By Thursday morning, my curiosity got the better of me. I accepted Richard's call on the first ring. Dinah, he said, relief evident in his voice. Thank God. We have a situation. So I've heard, I replied neutrally. Look, I'll be direct. The system is in complete meltdown. After that initial error on Monday, everything started falling apart. Client dashboards are showing incorrect data, trial records are mismatched, and the regulatory submission module is flagging compliance errors across the board. I closed my eyes, visualizing the cascade of failures, exactly what I designed the verification protocols to prevent. Richard, I signed a severance agreement. I'm no longer an employee. I understand that, he said quickly. We bring you back as a consultant, name your rate. We just need you to fix this. The offer was tempting, not for the money, but for the satisfaction of being proven right. However, I knew better than to rush into anything. I'd need full system access and complete autonomy to implement solutions, I said. Absolutely, Richard agreed immediately. Whatever you need. I'll think about it and get back to you this afternoon. After hanging up, I called Jason for an unofficial assessment of the situation. His description confirmed my suspicions. Samantha had implemented emergency fixes that had only worsened the problems, not understanding how each system interconnected with the others. It's bad, Diana, Jason said quietly. Pharmadane is threatening to pull their contract. That's 30% of the company's revenue, and there's talk about potential legal action if trial data has been compromised. I spent the morning weighing my options. The professional part of me wanted to rescue the system I'd built. The human part of me felt a certain satisfaction in Richard's desperation. By noon, I'd made my decision and called him back. I'll help, I said. My consulting rate is $300 an hour, with a minimum engagement of 40 hours, payable up front. Richard didn't even hesitate. Done. When can you start? I'll be there in an hour. Return as consultant. Walking back into Pharmatech felt surreal. Colleagues greeted me with obvious relief, while Richard hovered anxiously nearby. Samantha was noticeably absent. Where's Samantha? I asked as Richard escorted me to a workstation. She called in sick today, he said, not meeting my eyes. The stress of the situation. I logged into the system with the admin credentials Richard provided and began my assessment. The damage was extensive but followed a logical pattern. Exactly what happens when someone who doesn't understand the architecture tries to force solutions without addressing the underlying issues. By late afternoon, I had stabilized the most critical systems and developed a recovery plan for the rest. Richard checked in frequently, each time more relieved as progress became evident. You're a lifesaver, he said during one such visit. I don't know what we were thinking letting you go. I continued working without responding. The comment wasn't worth acknowledging. As I was preparing to leave for the day, Richard approached with a folder. I've been authorized to offer you your job back, he said, pushing the documents toward me, with a 15% raise and a more senior title. I glanced at the offer letter without touching it. I'll consider it after we resolve the current crisis, of course. He nodded eagerly. Take your time. But as I gathered my things, I noticed an email on Richard's open laptop on the desk beside me. It was from the CEO, with the subject line Transition Plan. The visible preview text read, Get everything documented properly this time before we make any changes. I felt a chill. They weren't offering my job back out of recognition of my value. They simply needed me to repair the system and document everything so thoroughly that even Samantha could maintain it. Then they discard me again. The decision I thought I had was just another illusion. The truth revealed. The next morning, I arrived early to continue my recovery work. The system was responding well to my corrections, and I estimated another 2 or 3 days before everything would be fully functional again. I worked methodically, carefully documenting each step, not for Richard's future transition plan, but for my own records. Around midday, the CEO, Elizabeth Harris, stopped by my workstation. Diana, I can't tell you how pleased we are that you've returned to help us through this crisis, she said warmly. Richard speaks very highly of your expertise. I nodded politely, continuing to type. The system should be stable by Monday. Wonderful. And I understand Richard has discussed your potential return to a permanent position. He mentioned it, I replied, keeping my focus on the screen. Elizabeth's smile tightened slightly at my lukewarm response. Well, we'd be delighted to have you back on the team. Perhaps once this situation is resolved, we could discuss the specifics over lunch. Perhaps, I agreed, non-committal. After she left, I took a short break, stepping outside for fresh air. As I scrolled through my phone, a message appeared from an unfamiliar number. Diana, it's Samantha. Can we talk? It's important. Curious, I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop across the street during my lunch break. When I arrived, Samantha was already there, looking pale and nervous. Thank you for coming, she said as I sat down. I've been trying to decide whether to tell you this. Tell me what? Samantha glanced around before leaning forward. The system failure wasn't an accident, at least not entirely. I felt my body go still. Explain. Richard asked me to implement some optimizations to the system last week, changes that would streamline the verification processes. He said you had approved the concept but were too busy to implement it yourself. I never approved any such changes, I said, my voice tight. I realized that later, Samantha admitted. When things started going wrong on Monday, I told Richard we needed to call you immediately. He refused, saying it would validate your overcomplicated approach and that we could fix it ourselves. She pulled out her phone and showed me a text exchange with Richard from Monday morning. His messages clearly instructed her to attempt fixes without contacting me, even as she expressed increasing concern about the escalating problems. By the time he finally decided to call you, I was having panic attacks. I couldn't sleep knowing what we'd done to the system, what I'd done by trusting him. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Samantha's eyes filled with tears. Because they're planning to blame me for everything. Yesterday, HR called me in and said they're conducting an investigation into procedural violations that led to the system failure. Richard told them I made unauthorized changes against his instructions. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Richard had deliberately undermined the system architecture I'd built, likely to prove that his streamlined approach was superior. When everything collapsed, he needed me to fix it. But afterward, Samantha would take the fall, and he would emerge as the manager who handled the crisis. I have the job offer from MetaSearch, Samantha continued. I was going to accept it before all this happened. Now Richard's threatening to give me a negative reference if I leave. He says he'll make sure I can't work in pharmaceutical data anywhere. I felt a surge of anger, not just for myself now, but for Samantha too. She was younger and inexperienced, but she didn't deserve to be manipulated and scapegoated. Forward me those texts, I said, my mind racing, and any other communications you have about the system changes. The evidence. As Samantha compiled the evidence, I realized I had a decision to make. I could walk away with my consulting fee and one of my new job offers, leaving Pharmatech to its toxic culture, or I could take action that might help Samantha, and perhaps other employees, while exposing Richard's sabotage. The choice was obvious. Back at Pharmatech, I continued the recovery work with renewed purpose. While my hands fixed the technical issues, my mind developed a different kind of solution. What I needed was irrefutable evidence of Richard's deliberate actions, evidence that couldn't be dismissed as a misunderstanding or technical confusion. I recalled something Jason had mentioned. All system changes were automatically logged on a secure server for regulatory compliance purposes. Those logs would show exactly who had authorized the optimizations and when they were implemented. During a moment when the office was mostly empty, I accessed the compliance server and found what I was looking for. The logs clearly showed Richard had used his administrative override to approve significant changes to the verification protocols, changes that directly contradicted the system architecture documentation. Most damning of all, he had backdated the approval to make it appear these changes had been pending for weeks, implying my tacit acceptance. I downloaded the logs to a secure drive and then sent myself an encrypted email with the files attached. For good measure, I took screenshots showing the timestamps of the original changes versus the backdated approvals. Now I needed to understand who else was involved. Had Elizabeth known about Richard's plan to sabotage the system, or was she merely complicit in using the crisis as an opportunity to rehire me temporarily? The answer came unexpectedly when Richard's calendar notification popped up on his laptop during our afternoon status meeting. Discuss DL transition plan with at 4:30 p.m. I need a bit more time on the regulatory module, I told Richard. Probably another hour. You go ahead to your meeting. Once he left, I quickly finished my work on the system, then set up one final safety measure, a hidden diagnostic tool that would alert me to any unauthorized changes to the core architecture, sending notifications directly to my personal email. It wasn't technically part of my consulting agreement, but I justified it as professional due diligence. At 5:15 p.m., I packed up my things and prepared to leave for the weekend. The system was now 80% recovered, with only minor issues remaining that I could resolve remotely. As I passed the conference room, I heard Richard's voice rising in frustration. But she's fixing everything. Can't we at least wait until Monday before? Elizabeth's response was cool and clear. The decision is made. Once she submits the final documentation, We thank her for her consulting work and proceed with the transition to the simplified architecture. Samantha was just a trial run. We've already identified another junior developer who can maintain the streamlined system at an even lower salary point. And if it fails again, it won't matter because Diana will have documented every aspect of the recovery process. That's the whole point of bringing her back as a consultant. I'd heard enough. I slipped away before they could exit the conference room, a strange calm settling over me. I now had all the evidence I needed and a weekend to decide exactly how to use it. The plan: Sunday evening, I received a text from Richard. System looking stable. Just need final documentation tomorrow to close out your consulting engagement. CEO wants to meet at 9 a.m. I responded simply, I'll be there. What Richard didn't know was that I'd spent the weekend consulting with both a labor attorney and a regulatory compliance expert at the FDA, who had expressed significant concern about the deliberate manipulation of pharmaceutical trial data systems. I had also accepted the position at MetaSearch Data with a specific condition they had happily accommodated. Monday morning would bring answers to questions Richard and Elizabeth didn't even know to ask, and I would be ready. I arrived at Pharmatech at exactly 9 a.m. Monday, carrying a slim portfolio containing my consulting invoice and several other carefully prepared documents. Elizabeth's executive assistant showed me into the conference room, where Elizabeth, Richard, and two people I didn't recognize, a woman in a severe suit and a nervous-looking man with a legal pad, were already seated. Diana, thank you for coming, Elizabeth began with practiced warmth. This is Patricia from HR, and Jonathan from legal. They're here to formalize the conclusion of your consulting engagement. I smiled pleasantly. How convenient. I've brought some documentation that requires legal review as well. Before anyone could respond, the conference room door opened again. Jason entered, followed by Samantha and two men in dark suits who definitely weren't Pharmatech employees. What is the meaning of this? Elizabeth demanded, half rising from her chair. I invited a few additional participants, I said calmly. Jason and Samantha have first-hand knowledge relevant to our discussion, and these gentlemen are from the FDA's Office of Regulatory Compliance. They're very interested in the events of the past week. The color drained from Richard's face. The FDA? This is an internal company matter. Actually, one of the agents interrupted. Deliberate tampering with systems that manage pharmaceutical trial data falls squarely within our jurisdiction. Ms. Lynn contacted our office with evidence suggesting serious compliance violations. I opened my portfolio and distributed copies of a comprehensive report detailing the system architecture, the unauthorized changes, the attempted cover-up, and the impact on client data integrity. The final page contained my sworn statement and signature. This constitutes my final documentation as requested, I said, sliding the original across to Elizabeth. I've also accepted a position with MetaSearch Data starting tomorrow. My first assignment is implementing a rescue plan for all Pharmatech clients who wish to transfer their data to a more stable platform. Elizabeth's composure finally cracked. You can't do this. Those clients are under contract. Contracts with specific performance guarantees regarding data integrity, I corrected her. Guarantees you've breached. My attorney has already reviewed the relevant clauses. The FDA agents began asking pointed questions about change management protocols and verification procedures. As the interrogation continued, I quietly excused myself, nodding to Jason and Samantha. My work here was finished. Epilogue: 6 months later, I sat in my new corner office at MetaSearch Data reviewing the quarterly performance report. The transition of former Pharmatech clients had gone remarkably smoothly, thanks in part to Jason and Samantha, who had both joined me at the new company. The industry newsletter on my desk contained a small item noting that Pharmatech had been acquired by a larger competitor after experiencing significant client attrition and regulatory challenges. Richard and Elizabeth had both pursued other opportunities following an FDA investigation into data integrity violations. My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder, a video meeting with our newest pharmaceutical client, formerly Pharmatech's largest account. Their research director had specifically requested that I oversee their data architecture personally, citing my exceptional reputation for system integrity. As I prepared for the call, Samantha knocked on my doorframe. The team wanted me to remind you about the celebration dinner tonight, she said. 1 year since we all started here. I smiled, remembering the day I'd negotiated with MetaSearch's CEO to bring both Jason and Samantha onto my team as part of my employment conditions. He'd been skeptical until I explained their potential value and their loyalty in providing evidence that helped expose Pharmatech's violations. I wouldn't miss it, I assured her. My new email notification chimed. The diagnostic system I'd created was alerting me that all client databases had completed their verification cycle successfully. The architecture I designed here was even more robust than my work at Pharmatech, incorporating lessons learned from that experience. As Samantha turned to leave, my personal phone buzzed with a text message from Jenny. Got the campus tour scheduled for Friday. Still okay to come with me? Absolutely, I replied, feeling a wave of contentment. Wouldn't miss it for anything. Some might view what happened at Pharmatech as revenge, but I saw it differently. It was simply the natural consequence of valuing systems over the people who built them, of prioritizing short-term savings over expertise and integrity. In the end, I hadn't needed to destroy Pharmatech. Their own short-sightedness had done that quite effectively without my help. I closed the performance report and prepared to meet with our new client, ready to demonstrate once again the value of doing things right, both in data architecture and in how we treat the people behind the technology.